So today, Jesus shows up like President Zelensky of Ukraine. We've gotten used to seeing his face, right? He showed up, a month or so ago, and the bad news was that, he was #1 on Putin's hit list. And what did he say? Go and tell that fox I'm not going anywhere. Bring me ammunition, not a ride out of here. And then in the last few weeks, we've heard him kind of with his strong indignation and rage at what's going on, and also words of comfort, right? And words of consolation to his people, trying to encourage them. So this morning, different time, but it's Jesus and it's Herod. And the Pharisees, who are not always Jesus's friends, are warning him, Herod is out to get you. And Jesus is saying the same thing. Go and tell that fox, I'm not going anywhere. I got to be out about my business today and tomorrow. I'm going to be healing, and I'm going to be casting out demons. I'm going to be curing the sick. And then Jesus also turns, and there's a word of condemnation and rage kind of against Jerusalem, how you stone the prophets and turn against those. And then again, Jesus turns, and there's this word of consolation. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I would gather you like a mother gathers her children. How much I want to hold you close to me, like a chicken gathers her brood under her wings, and you would not let me. So Jesus is this consoler and this comforter. And that is exactly what Van Gogh wanted to do his whole life. We know him as the painter. Even if we're not schooled in art like me, he's still kind of in the art around us. I mean, this is just in my household. I have these things with Van Gogh around them, right? I mean, we know him as this person whose art has sold his collective body of work, 2,000 drawings, 900 paintings, for over $1 billion, 60, 70, $80 million paintings. And we know the kind of broad brushstrokes of his life, that he was tormented. We know him cutting off his ear, and then the year in the mental asylum, and then shooting himself in the chest at age 37 and dying 2 days later. But we might not really get how completely unsuccessful he was. I mean, he sold in his life like a handful, like maybe 4 drawings and maybe 1 painting. His brother Theo is the art dealer who represented him, and that 1 painting sold for, in today's dollar, like $1,000. But before he was unsuccessful as a painter, he was unsuccessful as an art dealer. That's where he got his start. He grew up, he was born in the Netherlands in 1853 to an upper middle class family. And his family had 1 foot in the art world and 1 foot in kind of the theological religious world. He had a lot of art dealers in his family who were very wealthy. And so at 16, he became an art dealer, but he wasn't very good at it because he wasn't really motivated by profit. And he would tell some of his clients, buy cheaper art, so that didn't really go over that well, right? So then after he failed at that, the next thing in line was to be a preacher. His father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, they were all preachers in the Dutch Reformed Church. And he grew up in a parsonage, kind of a manse, and so he was immersed in church. His mother was a very religious person. And he had a very deep, kind of very fervent, kind of Dorothy Day Catholic worker, and really pretty intense faith. And he wasn't a good student, couldn't do his theological exams, but he volunteered to go be a lay preacher in this very poor mining village in Belgium. He was very drawn to the poor. And we know a great deal about his life, because if you know that Van Gogh, in addition to painting, his other art was his letter writing. He wrote something like 800 letters that survived. I have over 600 to his brother Theo, who was his closest confidant and friend, and his letters are really eloquent and powerful and evocative. And in these letters, he described his feelings as a 25-year-old for these poor people in this mining village. I mean, he just wept for the suffering they had. He describes, the very kind of like cold country that we have in the very difficult situations. But he didn't just look on, he identified with them. And so he gave up his middle-class lifestyle, and he really became kind of like a St. Francis character. He lived in kind of on a hut in the straw. He wore just a shirt and pants in the winter. He ate bread and water. He gave the house that was supplied for him as a pastor to the miners. And for all of this, it appears he was very well received, and they appreciated his solidarity. But his adjudicatory, the administrative, they thought he was crazy, basically. And they also thought his preaching ability was not very good. So he got let go after 6 months, right? Thank God, right? Because then the only thing left for him to do was to be an artist. His brother Theo kind of talked him into that, his brother who was the art dealer. And his brother, by that point, like Van Gogh as a young man had already like made sketches, like 400 sketches of other people's art. So they came up with a deal. Kind of reminds me of what we do with our own family, you know, kind of try to work with the troubled kid. Theo was like, I'll give you a monthly stipend, and in turn you send me your art. Well, Theo ended up with lots and lots of art in storage, and Van Gogh ended up as a painter. But not any painter. His mission was to console. He told one of his friends, you know, another artist, that he saw painting as a consolatory act for distressed hearts. He saw painting as a way to bring comfort and care. Now, he certainly knew a lot about people's distress, right? He cared for the poor, the miners, the fishermen, the farmers. He had his own distress. He had a prostitute he was kind of close to, and that went south. And then we know about his mental anguish that was very, very deep. And he was just a very lonely person, too. At some point, he left Paris for the south of France, and his idea there was that he would paint, and there would be like an artist colony. But in his writing, he describes it as a monastic order. And he's going to live there with these abbots and these brothers. Paul Gauguin is going to be the main abbot, but they're going to still be able to go to brothels and drink and smoke and all this. But anyway, you know, that's where he comes up with his yellow house there in the south of France, and he wants to have this house that's just painted with vibrant yellows and has decorated with sunflowers all over. I mean, he wanted to be in the south of France like we all do, where the light and the color was so beautiful, but he wanted friendship. And then Gauguin was just like, dude, you were so weird, right? And so at some point there was the fight, and Van Gogh cut his ear off, and then he spends the year in the mental asylum, and then he kills himself. And there is still, even until the end of his life, this desperate ability and passion to try to comfort. And in the last few years, I mean, he painted just prolifically, a painting a day. And our friend Matt Meyer Bolton said, of all of the paintings that kind of show Van Gogh's passion to comfort and console, this one, the mother who's rocking the cradle, kind of typifies what Van Gogh was trying to do. I love that painting because you can't see the cradle. You see the woman, you see the rope, and you're left to imagine who might be in that cradle. Could be Van Gogh, right? Could be our own kid. Could be our kid who's grown up, who struggles. It could be the people in the Ukraine, all those images we've seen, right, of the mothers and the children trying to make it to the train station, the fathers and the sons, the people left back home, right? It could be the Russian soldiers. I mean, there's so many people it could be. Van Gogh painted that, not imagining that it would hang in the Met one day in New York City. He told his friend that he imagined that painting hanging below deck of a ship of French or Icelandic fishermen. There had been this catastrophe the year before he painted that, huge catastrophe. Many sailors had died, 1887. And he said he imagined that painting hanging below deck, and the fishermen who might be afraid might look at it, and as the boat rocked side to side, they might remember themselves in that cradle, rocking side to side. They might hear in the sea a lullaby, someone singing to them some sweet song of comfort. But his genius didn't stop there. He told his brother later that he imagined this painting of the mother cradling, rocking the cradle. He imagined it hanging like a triptych, like a threefold piece, you know, like an altar. The mother rocking the cradle, and on each side, paintings of his sunflowers. Sunflowers, just these gorgeous bursts of gratitude, right? He said it was like a chorus of God's love, right? Just wrapping this little cradle and just rocking it. I think about that picture I saw of the strollers, you know, the Polish families who brought those strollers to the train station to leave to leave there for the Ukrainians, for the mothers and children arriving. And the strollers there, those strollers that would cradle, you know, you put that kid in that stroller and their little head, they're just out, right? And the strollers I saw, they weren't just strollers to cradle, right? There were, you know, stuffed animals and dolls. And I can just imagine those Polish families with their children, you know, saying, what is something you would like to share, right? So it's not just comfort for these people whose fear we can't imagine, but joy and fun, something delightful a kid could do, right? I mean, that's the invitation of Lent. Oh my goodness, distressed hearts are everywhere, and the crucifixion is not hard to imagine. And so we're called in this season, right, to try to imagine cradling this earth so tenderly, cradling one another, to try to go back deeply, to remember ourselves being cradled, and to think about the lullabies. I mean, Fritz and Ellie and Paula singing to us, and how we might also sing to this world. It was my daughter's 7th birthday, September 20th, and we were driving to Texas. Originally, I was going to fly, but it was just a week after September 11th, my high school reunion, 20 years. I planned to go by myself, but in those days, you know, no one was really flying yet. It was just 8, 9 days. Remember the families of 3,000 people still missing on the corner, walking through the streets of New York City, little children, teenagers, holding pictures. Has anybody seen my dad? You know, Mom, that thought that underneath, right, an air pocket, some little water, someone, that's the time it was. So I picked Eden up. She went to Lower Zion. She was in her little uniform, her little white top and blue skirt. She was as happy as a 7-year-old can be on their birthday. A few little cupcakes still left, chattering all the joy of a day all about you. And we'd gotten in the car and started driving. You know, it's not a drive known for beauty, but there's that part, right? You know what I'm talking about, where you start coming on the plains and then the Flint Hills. It's just so gorgeous. And it was exactly like this. The sky was just bright blue, and the sun so yellow, and Eden was chattering and singing. And then we came into a field of sunflowers that I had never before or since seen. I mean, miles and miles of sunflowers on each side of the interstate, and we were just driving through those sunflowers, just singing praise. At some point, I had to get out and take a picture because it's the painting that hangs in my museum. My little daughter's standing there, her arms outstretched, right? The beautiful sunflowers behind her, her arms stretched out, not like a cross so much, but more like a little girl who just wanted to love the world for every single thing it has, right? That's what we're called to do somehow, is somehow cradle and somehow sing and somehow rejoice and somehow take it in and somehow offer it back up to this world. So may this Lent be a time when our hearts are consoled. May it be a time when we cradle. May it be a time when we sing and celebrate somehow God's redemption come near. Amen.